Thank you, Bethan and Jeremy, for the invitation to take part in this very important conference. I've known Colin for nearly 20 years, since he was supervising my PhD, and we worked very closely together during that time in the academic world until last year when I left Galway University to work with Forras na Gaeilge. When I was a regular visitor to this country and to this city in the 1990s, I think I could probably have given this presentation in Welsh. Unfortunately, I don't feel that that's possible anymore because my skills and my confidence have deteriorated over the years, and therefore I'm going to carry on in English, but I apologise.
So we were asked to include some anecdote in our presentations in terms of our personal connection with Colin. So I'd like to bring you this photograph of a plane that we're imagining is leaving the tarmac at Cardiff Airport in September 2005, and the occasion was the day of my PhD, where I very nervously drove to the university in Dublin, where I was working at the time and just finished my PhD. That was Dublin City University. Colin was coming from Wales, and the second external examiner, Professor Joe Lee, was in New York by video link. In those days, that was a bit of an undertaking, but just as I was about to leave the house, my supervisor phoned me to say that the plane in which Colin was coming had gone on fire and had to return to Cardiff Airport. I think it was an Aer Oren plane, Colin. This is not a photograph of the incident, but I did look for it online, but I couldn't find any evidence of this. It wasn't serious enough, obviously, thankfully. But I believe that the plane returned to the tarmac in Cardiff Airport, and that Colin was one of only 3 people who rejoined it after it was repaired. And so I was very grateful to him forever for his tenacity in continuing the journey. I had an extra 4 or 5 hours of nail-biting time waiting for the Viva to happen, but thankfully it all went swimmingly in the end. Colin arrived safely and I passed, and that there began the rest of my life, really. So I thought it would be an interesting story to begin with today. So I want to talk to you. I am a recovering academic, as Bethan said. I left after 22 years in the academic sector. Only 6 months ago last week, I marked 6 months in my new post with Forras na Gaeilge, which is the National Irish Language Agency. And I want to begin by giving a little bit of context about Forras na Gaeilge. We're part of a larger organisation known as the Language Body, which was established in 1999 as a result of the Good Friday Agreement, which established 6 cross-border institutions in Ireland, which were an important step forward for nationalists in increasing and enhancing the all-Ireland dimension. And one of those bodies was to look after language, and contains 2 parts: the Board of Ulster Scots, which is a closely related variety to Scots, which is still spoken in a much more restricted way in Northern Ireland, and of course for Irish then with Forras na Gaeilge. And so we are a cross-border institution, and this has transformed the promotion of the Irish language and has moved it from being almost entirely a responsibility of the Republic of Ireland's government to now a shared responsibility of both governments. That has not been simple. There's been lots of issues. We've seen the problems with the northern institutions in recent years and so on. And it has created additional complexities. And in fact, the sociolinguist Martin O'Murrough wrote over 20 years ago that it was a mistake to remove responsibility for language policy from the Irish government and to attach it to an unstable cross-border peace process. And you know, the stop and start in Stormont over the last 25 years has really shown the foresightedness, I think, of that view. But here we are. This is the context. It has transformed the promotion of Irish in an all-Ireland context, and we have offices, therefore, in Dublin and Belfast, as well as other parts of the country, but our main offices are in both jurisdictions. So I want to talk a little bit about our areas of work, and very briefly, and then I'm going to focus on 2 examples that I consider are of best practice in our organisation in keeping with the themes of the conference. So we offer a range of support schemes to various areas of work in society, education and youth, the public sector, arts, community and business. We have a small amount of our activities focused on business. I'm quite note with interest today the number of references to the weakness of language policy in the private sector. I'm not saying that we're particularly strong in that area, but it is an area that we recognise and have a programme for. We have links with Scotland, of course, through Colm Cille, and another major area of work is our Irish Language Books programme. We also have a section dealing with community language planning, which has been put on a firmer, if faulty, basis in Ireland in recent years. This year celebrates the 10th anniversary of the language planning process. We're closely involved in that. We also fund most of the Irish language media, other than broadcast media, so the print media, digital media, 2 radio stations and so on. One of the examples of best practice that I'll be looking at relates to terminology and lexicography, so we have a division dealing with that. And we also fund a number of lead organisations. This is not a model without its problems either, but these are 6 external organisations that are funded by us, to which we outsource various aspects of the work. And another important aspect of our job is to advise both the Irish and the British governments. So a little bit about the policy and the funding context. We're core funded on a 75-25 percentage or ratio, based on the majority of the money coming from the government in the Republic of Ireland and a smaller amount coming from the north. But this has been very problematic in recent years because budgetary increases or changes are dependent on agreement by both governments. And we didn't have a government in the north until last week, until last Saturday. And therefore we have been in stasis, in paralysis in terms of our budgetary constraints for quite a long time. The institutions were suspended for 2 years until last week. I had to ask Jeremy to change my slide at the last minute. We weren't expecting things to change, but thankfully they have. But now we have 2 ministers from the DUP who are running the departments of most concern to us in the north, communities and education. So that will bring its own challenges, because they're both individuals who have been on record as strongly opposing Irish language policy in Northern Ireland in the past. So, for instance, an example of this challenge with the funding mechanism is that the Irish government had an extra €700,000 to give to us last year, but they couldn't do that because there was no government in the north. So the Irish government has been giving once off or twice off or sometimes thrice off, if that exists, funding for temporary projects, but that's not sustainable. So the core funding mechanism is a challenge for our organisation, definitely. If you look at this graph, in comparison with the Arts Council, which is a Republic of Ireland body, look at the enormous increase in their funding since 2000, since we were established. You can see our line at the bottom has remained more or less constant. So there's a 7 times difference in the budget of the Arts Council, which is under the complete control of the Irish government, and Foras na Gaeilge, which is linked to the unstable cross-border peace process. So that's definitely the biggest challenge facing us and has all sorts of impact on our work. Notwithstanding, I want to talk about examples of best practice, because that's what we're here today. And I've chosen 2. One, I think, is in the area of lexicography. If any of you have studied Irish in the past, you will recognise these books well. Your back was probably broken from carrying them around to lectures or bringing them with you if you needed to do any translation or any language-related work. Thankfully, these books are now entirely available online. It's part of the development of terminology and dictionaries, which is one of our statutory responsibilities, one of the responsibilities that is set out in the legislation, the British-Irish Agreement Act of 1999. And so when we were established that year, lexicography in Irish had really been neglected. The dictionary on the right was more than 40 years old, dating from 1958. It was very much a dictionary that, as one commentator said, served the needs of mid-century Ireland well, but the first edition of it didn't include the word computer, for instance, so obviously reflecting its time, so it was grossly in need of revision. And the main Irish-English dictionary on the left was more than 20 years old, and there was no major monolingual Irish dictionary, which is an important requirement for any language. So we began our lexicography work in earnest again in the year 2000, working on a major new English-Irish dictionary and establishing a lexicography unit in Foras na Gaeilge. So our new English-Irish dictionary was launched online at the website folklore.ie, meaning dictionary.ie, in 2013, containing about 48,000 headwords and 140,000 word census, and we've had an app in recent years as well, and that's all freely available. There's a number of sound files as well showing or giving the pronunciation in different dialects in the 3 main traditional dialects of Irish. And this project came to really fruition entirely in 2020 when the not so concise looking English-Irish dictionary was published. It's an enormous book, but you know, it sold extremely well despite its size, and it's the entirety of the work, but there's extra material being added online, of course. And you can see some of the statistics there with 1,800 pages, 30,000 entries, 85,000 sentences, 200,000 words and phrases, and then it gives about 60% of, as I say, of the online material, but the online material is expanding all the time. There's a very important language and grammar supplement about, you know, suggested use of language, which I think is very important and often needed in these contexts. Some important stylistic guidance and so on there. And as you can see, for a book related to the Irish language, 10,000 copies is pretty impressive. So we also have an online dictionary and language library, which has been at tangalan.ie, which means language library, where digitized versions of the historical dictionaries are available. Some of the dictionaries that I mentioned, the English-Irish dictionary from the 1950s, the Irish-English dictionary from the 70s, a small monolingual dictionary that was being used for schools, and a grammar wizard and grammar and pronunciation files as well. So that's been an important step forward. Let's look at the use of our sites from last year. We had 1.8 million users of the main dictionary site, folklore.ie, with 28 million pages. The library site of historical dictionaries, 2.4 million and 34 million pages. I think the statistics at the bottom are particularly interesting. You know, when we started this project, mobile phones were at about 20% of usage. That's been completely reversed now, with the vast majority of use on the phone through the app. But we're also kind of interested in the statistics. You know, 75% from Ireland, obviously, but 14% from the US and 5% from Britain are pretty significant in themselves, particularly the 14% from the US. I was asking the dictionary people if they could account for these figures, and no, we need to do more research to get to the bottom of them, but certainly the figure from the US is particularly strong. So our new dictionary project then, which began last year, is a 5-year plan to produce 2 major new dictionaries, a monolingual Irish dictionary, a major cultural pillar for any language community, and a new Irish-English dictionary. And the work has been advancing in parallel, and this will be published online. We do not plan to publish in hard copy this dictionary. The last one that I showed you was the last such dictionary that will be produced. And this has got a €2.5 million budget from both governments, so it's a major part of our work. So the second example that I want to talk about is an Irish language support scheme for schools. As you know, Irish is a core subject in the education system in the Republic of Ireland, in that all students must study it from age 5 to age 18. But immersion education is weak. Only about 8% of schools in the Republic are Irish medium, so it's in stark contrast with Wales and in extremely stark contrast with the Basque Country and Catalonia, for instance. But about 50,000 students, or 12% of the secondary school population, have an exemption from studying Irish, which is a very serious situation and a very serious threat to the language, and exemptions are being offered without any clear educational grounds, and people are studying other languages happily but are apparently incapable of studying Irish and so on. So it's a very serious issue that's undermining the core policy and risks bringing the whole thing falling down. So the programme that is in place is significant, called Gael Bhratach, Irish-speaking flag, and this supports language socialisation in Irish in schools in order to bridge the gap between ability and use, because we have relatively good figures for the ability of Irish in the population, but very poor levels of use. So Gael Bhratach is delivered by one of our lead organisations called Gael Linn. It's one of our core-funded organisations, but it's a flagship project of that organisation with 10 staff members, involving supports for schools around the country who wish to socialise children in Irish. As you can see, the funding is quite significant. I mean, we have a budget of 20 million, and this scheme alone has a budget of almost 1 million last year from Forest na Gaeilge, but also from the Department of Education and the Department of the Gaeltacht. Of course, a cynic may say that the Department of Education is happy to spend this money to take away attention from the problem of exemptions, but I wouldn't dare to say such a thing. So the aims and elements of Gael Bhreatach are basically along the socialisation line, that more Irish be heard and seen around the school, that language awareness be increased, that students be encouraged to use Irish among themselves and in schools, and that students and teachers' confidence would be boosted. And there's various mechanisms in place involving committees and slogans and site visits and ongoing support from the Gael Bhreatach team. So it's an extremely successful programme. The yellow line denotes the waiting lists. So as we can see, we have over 250 schools in the last school year were waiting for the scheme to start because they had showed an interest in it. With the primary schools is the light blue, so over 150 of those, slightly fewer secondary schools in purple. So there's a strong latent demand for this scheme, but not enough capacity to deliver it. And we can see there's apps have been produced, a lot of high quality online material, videos and so on, and it's been very successful. We've been undertaking an evaluation of this recently, and our consultants concluded that this was a flagship scheme capable of playing a major role in relation to language planning in an inclusive way. They said that it reaches large target communities in terms of language planning, so not only pupils, but their teachers, their parents, the wider community, and also reported very positive feedback for participating schools, and also suggested additional funding for Gael Bhreatach. So that, I hope, ladies and gentlemen, has given you a brief insight into some of the work that we do that I think constitutes examples of best practice, both work that we directly direct ourselves in terms of lexicography and work that we support through an external funded organisation. So I just want to finish by thanking Colin. Diolch Colin am de gymorth personol I professional yn ystod y blynyddoedd. Diolch I chi am wrando. Thank you very much.